Spider-Man Brand New Day may have just exposed one of the biggest problems facing the DC universe. While Sony's latest Spider-Man movie is reportedly racing toward an unbelievable $2.3 billion worldwide, Supergirl is being left in the dust, and the difference has become impossible for Warner Brothers and DC Studios to ignore. What's even more embarrassing is that, according to the claims surrounding these box office numbers, Spider-Man Brand New Day has outperformed Supergirl, Superman, and Suicide Squad combined. And now, that success is reportedly triggering major decisions behind the scenes at Warner Brothers, including layoffs, budget reductions, and changes to the strategy James Gunn and Peter Safran have been building for the DCU. So what exactly is happening inside Warner Brothers right now, and why has David Zaslav apparently decided that major changes are necessary? Spider-Man Brand. New Day's reported box office performance has completely changed the conversation surrounding the superhero genre. At around $2.3 billion worldwide, with projections in this discussion suggesting that it could potentially move toward $2.5 billion, the movie has become a massive success for Sony and Marvel. And regardless of whether you think it's fair to compare Spider-Man directly with Supergirl, there's one undeniable point here. Audiences are still willing to spend their money on superhero movies when they believe the movie is worth seeing. That's important because the superhero genre has spent years dealing with declining audience enthusiasm. We've seen major franchises struggle, sequels underperform, and established characters fail to generate the excitement they once did. So when something like Brand New Day comes along and performs at this level, Hollywood executives are naturally going to pay attention. And that's exactly why the reported reaction inside Warner Brothers is so interesting. According to the claims surrounding the situation, the enormous success of Spider-Man Brand New Day has put even more pressure on DC Studios following Supergirl's disappointing theatrical performance. The argument being made is that Sony managed to give audiences something that felt familiar while still making the movie feel different from what came before. The film has been described by supporters as more closely connected to the comics, while also giving Tom Holland's Spider-Man a story that feels more independent from the previous trilogy. Whether you personally agree with that assessment or not, the box office result speaks for itself. And now, the question is whether DC can figure out how to create that same level of excitement. Because according to the latest claims, things behind the scenes at Warner Brothers are becoming increasingly complicated. We're now hearing about additional layoffs affecting people connected to DC Studios and Warner Brothers following the previously reported decision to remove members of the marketing team involved with Supergirl. The latest allegations suggest that artists, animators, editors, and smaller supporting performers connected to future DC projects could also be affected by these restructuring plans. If accurate, this wouldn't simply be about Supergirl anymore. It could potentially affect multiple projects currently being developed under James Gunn and Peter Safran. One project that has been brought into the discussion is The Brave and the Bold, Warner Brothers' planned Batman movie within the DCU. There are also concerns about how these changes could affect other Batman-related projects and future DC productions that are still somewhere between early development and active production. And this is where the situation becomes particularly interesting. The claim suggests that Warner Brothers leadership wants to reduce costs across the board, including cutting back on marketing expenditures for upcoming movies and television projects. There are also claims that the studio could become more conservative when it comes to how much it spends on talent and production for future DCU projects. If those changes actually happen on a large scale, they could fundamentally alter the way Gunn and Safran execute their plans. And reportedly, that's exactly why there has been tension between DC Studios leadership and Warner Brothers executives. Gunn and Safran have been building an interconnected DC universe with a large number of projects planned across movies and television. But if Warner Brothers suddenly begins reducing budgets and slowing down development, that could force DC Studios to rethink how quickly it wants to expand. And honestly, that may be one of the biggest questions facing the DCU right now. Are Gunn and Safran trying to build this universe too quickly? Because compared with Marvel, DC is still playing catch-up when it comes to establishing a new interconnected franchise. The MCU spent years building its audience, introducing characters individually, and gradually connecting those stories together. The new DCU, meanwhile, is attempting to establish multiple projects while simultaneously convincing audiences that this new continuity is worth investing in. That is a difficult task, and if Supergirl's performance has weakened audience confidence while Spider-Man is generating enormous numbers for Sony, Warner Brothers executives have even more incentive to rethink the strategy. The situation could become even more complicated if the reported layoffs begin affecting projects that are already in production. Man of Tomorrow has also been mentioned in connection with these potential changes, particularly when it comes to post-production departments and other behind-the-scenes positions. If editors and other production staff are removed or replaced, there's always the possibility of delays or adjustments to the schedules of projects that are already underway. And that raises another major question. Could these cost-cutting decisions eventually affect the marketing campaign for Man of Tomorrow? The movie is expected to receive a major promotional push ahead of its planned July 2027 release, with marketing reportedly beginning around May 2027. If Warner Bros. Really is preparing to reduce marketing expenditures, then Man of Tomorrow could be one of the projects that reveals just how serious these changes actually are. The same could apply to The Brave and the Bold and other future Batman projects. At this point, though, it's important to separate confirmed developments from speculation. There are plenty of claims circulating about Warner Bros., DC Studios, layoffs, and the company's future strategy, but not every online report should automatically be treated as confirmed fact. What we can say is that the reported financial disappointment surrounding Supergirl has created additional pressure on DC Studios, and the massive success being attributed to Spider-Man Brand New Day makes that contrast even more noticeable. That's why this comparison has become such a major talking point. One superhero franchise is reportedly pulling in billions of dollars, while another is trying to rebuild audience confidence after a major theatrical disappointment. And that should be a wake-up call for DC. The answer isn't necessarily to copy Marvel or Sony. In fact, DC probably needs to do the opposite. The new DC universe needs its own identity. It needs stories that feel different, characters that audiences genuinely care about, and movies that give people a reason to leave their homes and buy a theatrical ticket. Simply releasing more projects isn't enough. Simply connecting everything together isn't enough. And spending more money isn't automatically going to solve the problem either. The biggest challenge is making audiences excited again. That's ultimately what Spider-Man Brand New Day appears to have accomplished. And if Warner Bros. Really is reconsidering its strategy after watching those box office results, the next few years could look very different for the DCU. There's also the question of David Zaslav's future at Warner Bros. There has been ongoing speculation surrounding his position and the broader corporate situation involving Warner Bros. Discovery, including the potential Paramount merger and other major industry developments. Some reports and commentary have suggested that Zaslav could eventually step down sometime during 2026, although the exact timing and circumstances remain uncertain. If he does leave, the timing will be particularly interesting, because if the current DC strategy continues to struggle, Zaslav would potentially be leaving behind a very complicated legacy. On the other hand, if the upcoming DC projects succeed, that could completely change the narrative. And that's why the next few releases are so important. Supergirl may have disappointed, but the DCU isn't finished. Superman, Clayface, Man of Tomorrow, The Brave and the Bold, and the other projects in development will ultimately determine whether James Gunn's vision can actually regain momentum. The real test isn't whether DC can compete with one Spider-Man movie. The real test is whether DC can consistently give audiences movies they actually want to see. Because if Spider-Man Brand New Day can reportedly reach numbers approaching $2.5 billion, it proves that superhero fatigue isn't necessarily the entire explanation for DC's recent problems. Audiences haven't completely abandoned superheroes. They've simply become more selective, and that's a lesson Warner Bros. Cannot afford to ignore. So now the biggest question is what happens next. Does Warner Bros. Continue cutting costs and restructuring DC Studios? Will James Gunn and Peter Safran have to slow down their plans? Could these changes affect Man of Tomorrow or The Brave and the Bold? And most importantly, can the DCU recover from the damage caused by Supergirl's underperformance? That's what we'll be watching very closely. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you believe DC needs to completely rethink its strategy, or should James Gunn be given more time to build his universe? And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to SubiiVerse for more Hollywood, Marvel, DC, and entertainment news. I'll see you in the next one.